I'll never forget the exact moment the Cartier box clicked open beneath the crystal chandelier. 150 guests held their breath. My husband Sterling, my husband, was down on one knee in the center of our Christmas Eve gala. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Cassie, my best friend, the woman I'd pulled from poverty, the woman whose mother's surgery I'd paid for, the woman currently living in our guest house. And here's the part that still makes my blood run cold. We were wearing the same dress, both of us in crimson red. His private joke, I realized later. His twisted little game. But what happened next? What came out of Cassie's mouth when that 3-carat diamond caught the light? That's when everything I thought I knew shattered like champagne glasses hitting marble. See, I wasn't always the woman in the mansion. 6 years ago, I was eating ramen in a studio apartment, grinding through law school finals. I clawed my way to the top of Manhattan's most ruthless firm. I earned every silk dress in my closet, every invitation to these glittering parties. I just never imagined my crown would be the thing someone wanted to steal. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. The marble floors of the Vandermeer estate stretch for what feels like miles. 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a wine cellar that could stock a small restaurant for a decade. Sometimes I still catch myself running my fingers along the silk wallpaper in disbelief, remembering when luxury meant splurging on name-brand pasta sauce. Sterling swept into my life during my second year at Crawford & Associates. I was the youngest senior associate they'd ever promoted, drowning in corporate litigation files at 2 a.m. when he walked into the conference room with that devastating smile. He was there to discuss a merger, some tech acquisition worth more money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes. But instead of talking business, he asked me to dinner. 3 months later, I was waking up in penthouses with floor-to-ceiling views of Central Park. 6 months after that, he proposed on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and I actually laughed because it felt like something from a movie I'd never be cast in. The girl who grew up clipping coupons and walking everywhere to save subway fare was suddenly deciding between Vera Wang and Monique Lhuillier for her wedding dress. The wedding itself was obscene. 400 guests, ice sculptures, a 12-tier cake that probably cost more than my first car. Sterling's mother, Diane, watched the whole ceremony with the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes, the kind that said she was tolerating an unfortunate situation with as much grace as she could muster. But I told myself it didn't matter. Sterling loved me. He saw past my Target heels and student loans to the woman I was becoming. He encouraged my career, bragged about my courtroom victories at dinner parties, introduced me to judges and politicians who could shape my future. Our life became a blur of charity galas and weekend trips to the Hamptons. Private chefs who knew my coffee order. A housekeeper who pre-steamed my blouses. A driver who appeared whenever I needed him. I donated more money in a single evening than my mother earned in a year. And somehow that felt both empowering and deeply unsettling. I kept working. That was my anchor. While other society wives spent their days at Pilates and lunch, I was still grinding through depositions and strategy sessions. I wasn't just Mrs. Sterling Vandermeer. I was Eleanor Reyes Vandermeer, partner track at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. Sterling said he admired my drive, said it was one of the things he loved most about me. I believed him. God, I actually believed every word. Looking back now, I can see the small shifts, the way his hand lingered on my lower back for just a second less at events. The dinners where he checked his phone more than he looked at me. The nights he came home smelling like someone else's perfume and blamed it on networking. But I was too busy celebrating my victories to notice I was slowly losing the war. I met Cassie in the waiting room of Mount Sinai Hospital on a Tuesday that felt like the universe was testing my capacity for empathy. I was there visiting a client who'd been in a car accident. She was there because her mother had just suffered a massive stroke, and the doctors were using words like experimental treatment and out-of-network costs. She was crying into a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee when I sat down next to her. Sometimes you just recognize your own desperation in someone else's eyes. I'd been that girl once, calculating whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries, wondering if one more credit card would destroy me or save me. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her mother, a seamstress who'd worked herself to the bone raising Cassie alone after her father disappeared, about the medical bills stacking up like a prison sentence, about the efficiency apartment in Queens, where she could hear her neighbors' arguments through walls thin as paper, about the receptionist job that barely covered her subway card. I did something that night that Sterling later called impulsive, and his mother called reckless. I paid for the surgery. All of it. $230,000 that felt like monopoly money to me, but meant everything to Cassie. The gratitude in her eyes was intoxicating. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe. She kept saying, "I'll pay you back," even though we both knew she never could, never would. I told her friendship wasn't a transaction. I told her I just wanted to help. After that, Cassie became part of my life like morning coffee. We did spin classes together. She came to my office parties, wide-eyed at the champagne and shrimp cocktails. I helped her get a better job at a marketing startup, one of Sterling's portfolio companies. I bought her professional clothes when she couldn't afford them herself, framing it as leftover samples from a shopping trip to preserve her dignity. When her landlord raised the rent beyond anything reasonable, I covered the difference. When her mother needed physical therapy, I made calls to specialists. When she mentioned she'd never been to Paris, Sterling and I brought her along on our anniversary trip and pretended it had always been the plan. Sterling seemed charmed by her at first, called her sweet and refreshing, compared to the social climbers we usually encountered. He joked that she was the only person in Manhattan who didn't want something from us, who liked us for who we really were. His mother was less enchanted. Diane had a way of looking at Cassie like she was tracking mud through the house, this barely concealed disgust masked behind tight smiles and passive-aggressive comments about knowing one's place. But I defended Cassie, protected her, brought her deeper into our world, because I genuinely believed I'd found someone real in a city built on facades. I made her family, and family, I thought, was forever. Diane Vandermeer made her feelings about me crystal clear exactly 7 minutes after Sterling proposed. We'd flown back from the Mediterranean, still drunk on champagne and possibility. And Sterling insisted we tell his mother in person. The Vandermeer matriarch lived in a Fifth Avenue penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, all antiques and uncomfortable furniture designed to remind you that you didn't belong. She took one look at my ring, then at me, and said, "Well, I suppose every family has its scandals." Sterling laughed it off as a joke. I felt the words land like a slap. The wedding planning was a 9-month exercise in psychological warfare. Diane questioned every choice I made with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of someone who enjoyed the cutting. My dress was a bit much for someone of your background. My guest list was charmingly democratic. My decision to keep my maiden name professionally was predictably modern. At the rehearsal dinner, she gave a toast that still burns when I think about it. She spoke about the Vandermeer legacy, about how the family had built empires through careful selection of partners who understood the weight of the name. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Sterling has always had a generous heart, sometimes too generous, but I suppose love makes fools of even the most sensible men." The room went silent. Sterling squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. Said nothing. After we married, the attacks became more subtle, but no less vicious. She had a gift for compliments that felt like insults, observations that left you questioning yourself for hours afterward. At family dinners, she'd mention Sterling's ex-girlfriend Madison, a blonde whose family tree apparently grew straight through the Mayflower. "Such a shame that didn't work out," she'd sigh. Madison understood the responsibilities that come with this life. She criticized my work schedule, suggesting that a proper wife would prioritize her husband's needs over her little career. She commented on my clothes, my hair, my choice of wine at dinner parties. Nothing was ever quite right, quite refined, quite enough. The most cutting moments came when Sterling wasn't in the room. She'd corner me at charity events, her voice low and venomous. You think you're the first ambitious girl to trap a Vandermeer man? They all think they're special. They all think love is enough. She'd smooth her Chanel suit and smile. But blood always tells, darling, and yours is remarkably common. I took it, all of it, because I loved Sterling and I believed our marriage was strong enough to withstand his mother's poison, because I thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, proved my worth, she'd eventually accept me. I should have recognized the real message. Diane didn't want me accepted. She wanted me gone, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. It was Sterling's idea to offer Cassie the guest house. September, just as the leaves started turning. We were having coffee on the terrace when he mentioned it, casual as discussing the weather. You know, the guest house is just sitting empty. Cassie's lease is up next month. Why don't we offer it to her? I blinked. The guest house wasn't exactly a cottage. It was a 3-bedroom, fully renovated space with its own kitchen and entrance, separated from the main house by a garden that cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. That's incredibly generous, I said slowly. But wouldn't that be, I don't know, awkward? Having her so close? Sterling's smile was warm, convincing. She's your best friend. And honestly, the security of having someone on the property is worth it. Plus, think about how much we could help her. She could actually save money, build a real future. The logic was sound. The gesture seemed kind. And I was touched that Sterling cared enough about my friendship to suggest it. So Cassie moved in 2 weeks later. At first, everything seemed normal. Better than normal. Cassie would join us for dinners, making the massive estate feel less empty when I worked late. She'd walk the grounds in the morning, coffee in hand, looking like she'd stumbled into a fairy tale. Sterling was friendly, warm, the perfect host. Then the shifts started. Small things I tried to rationalize. Sterling began staying late at the office more frequently. 3 nights a week became 4, then 5. When he came home, he'd pour himself bourbon and disappear into his study instead of coming to bed. The man who used to text me throughout the day went silent for hours at a time. Our date nights evaporated. When I suggested restaurants or shows, he'd claim exhaustion or last-minute conference calls. But I'd see him outside, animated and laughing, talking with Cassie by the pool house at 10 p.m. when he'd told me he was too tired for conversation. I noticed him looking at his phone differently, tilting it away, taking calls in other rooms. Once, I walked into the kitchen and caught the tail end of a whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when he saw me. "Just business," he said, but his neck flushed the way it did when he was lying. The real warning sign came in October. I had a major case closing, the kind that would secure my partnership. I'd been preparing for months. Sterling knew the date. I'd reminded him a dozen times. The night before my closing arguments, I found him in the garden with Cassie, sharing a bottle of wine under the pergola. They were laughing at something on her phone, their heads close together in the warm glow of string lights. He'd forgotten my case entirely. When I approached, the laughter stopped. Cassie suddenly remembered she had an early morning. Sterling looked at me like I was interrupting something private. "We were just talking," he said. But he couldn't quite meet my eyes. That night, he slept in the guest room, said he didn't want to disturb me before my big day. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But my gut knew what my heart refused to accept. Something had fundamentally changed. Tiffany arrived the day before Thanksgiving with her usual whirlwind energy, dropping shopping bags in the foyer and pulling me into a hug that smelled like her signature jasmine perfume. My sister had always been able to read me better than anyone, which was both comforting and terrifying. We were in the kitchen, ostensibly helping the chef prepare side dishes, though mostly we were drinking wine and catching up. That's when she said it. "So what's going on with Sterling?" I looked up from the Brussels sprouts I was trimming. "What do you mean?" "Come on, Elena. I've been here for 3 hours and he's barely spoken to you. He's checked his phone like 20 times. And who's the woman in the guest house?" "That's Cassie, my friend. I've told you about her." Tiffany's expression shifted into something I couldn't quite read. "Your friend lives here now?" On the property? She needed help with rent. We had the space. I heard the defensive edge in my voice. Babe! Tiffany set down her wine glass. I've seen the way he looks at his phone. That's not work. And I've seen the way he doesn't look at you. That's not marriage. My chest tightened. You're wrong. Sterling and I are fine. He's just stressed with the business. Is he, though? She reached across the counter, her hand covering mine. Because from where I'm standing, you look like you're trying to convince yourself of something that isn't true. I pulled my hand away. You don't know what you're talking about. You met someone on a dating app 3 months ago, and suddenly you're a relationship expert? It was cruel and I knew it. Tiffany flinched. I'm your sister, she said quietly. And I love you. So I'm going to say this once. Something is wrong here. I can feel it. And I think you can too, but you're too proud or too scared to admit it. There's nothing wrong. My voice was steel. Sterling loves me. We're happy. And I'd appreciate it if you kept your observations to yourself during dinner tomorrow. Tiffany stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But when you're ready to stop lying to yourself, call me. At Thanksgiving dinner the next day, Sterling was charming and attentive, making jokes and refilling wine glasses. Cassie joined us, telling stories that made everyone laugh. Diane watched the whole scene with that enigmatic smile. I caught Tiffany's eyes across the table. She raised her eyebrows slightly, a silent question. I looked away. After everyone left, I found Tiffany's text. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm here when you need me. I deleted it without responding. I wasn't ready to admit that everything I'd built was constructed on sand. Not yet. The Christmas Eve gala was supposed to be perfect. I'd planned it for months, every detail choreographed down to the minute. The 12-foot tree dripping with crystal ornaments, the live orchestra playing carols in the grand ballroom, the champagne fountain that cost more than a car. 150 of Manhattan's elite flowing through our home in their designer gowns and custom tuxedos. I'd chosen my dress weeks ago, a crimson-red Valentino that hugged every curve, with a neckline that walked the line between elegant and dangerous. When I walked down the staircase that evening, I felt powerful, beautiful, like the woman I'd fought so hard to become. Then I saw Cassie. She was standing near the Christmas tree, and she was wearing the exact same dress. Same color, same cut, same designer. The odds of that happening accidentally were astronomical. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Cassie's eyes met mine across the room, and I saw something flicker there. Panic? Guilt? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, I felt Sterling's hand on my lower back. Darling, he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. You look stunning. But when I turned to look at him, expecting sympathy or surprise, I saw something that made my blood freeze. He was smiling. Not the warm smile I'd fallen in love with. Something else. Something cold and calculating and satisfied. His eyes flicked between Cassie and me, taking in the matching dresses. And then, so briefly I almost missed it, he smirked. What an interesting coincidence, he murmured, loud enough only for me to hear. Red was always my favorite color. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like we were part of some private joke I wasn't in on, like this was intentional. Sterling, I started, but he was already moving away, greeting guests with that practiced charm that had once swept me off my feet. I stood frozen in my crimson dress, watching my husband work the room, watching him stop to whisper something to Cassie that made her face go pale, watching Diane observe everything with that serpent smile. The evening blurred, champagne and small talk, and the pressure of performing happiness while my mind raced. I kept catching Sterling's eyes on me, assessing, calculating. Several times I saw him texting, his expression unreadable. Then, at exactly 9 p.m., the orchestra fell silent. Sterling walked to the center of the ballroom, beneath the crystal chandelier that cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor. The crowd parted around him, murmuring with curiosity. He reached into his jacket pocket. My heart stopped. He pulled out a small blue box. Cartier. Even from across the room, I could see the distinctive color. I have an announcement to make, Sterling said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. And then he turned. Not toward me. Toward Cassie. Time seemed to fracture into strange, crystalline pieces. I watched Sterling kneel, the Cartier box opening to reveal a diamond so large it looked obscene under the chandelier light. I heard the collective gasp of our guests. I felt Diane's eyes on me, waiting for my humiliation. Cassie, Sterling said, his voice ringing with false emotion. You've brought light into my life when I thought I'd lost my way. Will you marry me? The room held its breath. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening in my own home, at my own party, surrounded by people who knew I was his wife. Cassie stood frozen, staring down at Sterling. Her face was unreadable. Then she reached into her clutch. I need everyone to hear something, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She pulled out her phone, connecting it to the house's sound system with the code I'd given her months ago. Before I answer, Sterling's smile faltered. Cassie, what are you— 8 weeks ago, she continued, her eyes now locked on mine with something that looked like apology. Sterling offered me $500,000. He asked me to seduce him, to let myself be photographed in compromising positions, to help him build a case for divorce. The room erupted in whispers. Sterling stood up, his face transforming from shock to rage. That's insane. She's lying. I'm not. Cassie pressed play. Sterling's voice filled the ballroom, tinny but unmistakable. Elena's smart. We need ironclad evidence of her infidelity, or we lose 60% in the divorce. My lawyers say if we can prove she was cheating first, we protect the assets. Then Diane's voice, cold and satisfied. The prenup your father insisted on is useless if she's innocent. We need her dirty. This Cassie girl is perfect. Poor, desperate, grateful. She'll do anything. Sterling. 500,000 to play along for a few months. Once I have the photos, once her reputation is destroyed, she'll take whatever settlement we offer just to escape the humiliation. Diane. And then you'll marry Madison Whitmore like you should have from the beginning. Someone appropriate. The recording continued. Sterling discussing which photographers to hire. Diane suggesting which society columnists to leak stories to. Both of them laughing about my pathetic career and how I'd never see it coming. By the time the recording ended, Sterling had gone white. Diane stood rigid near the fireplace, her mask finally cracked. Cassie looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I wore a wire every single conversation for 2 months. I have over 40 hours of recordings, of him plotting, of her coaching him, of both of them planning to destroy you. She pulled something from beneath her dress, a small recording device taped to her ribs. I'm wearing one right now, she whispered, recording his proposal, his humiliation of you in front of everyone you know. Sterling lunged forward, but 2 men in dark suits materialized from the crowd, blocking him. Not guests. Security. Cassie turned to Sterling, her voice steady now. So to answer your question, no, I won't marry you, but I will testify against you. I stepped forward then, my crimson dress catching the light. Every eye in the room turned to me. I'd been so still, so silent, that some guests had probably forgotten I was there. The betrayed wife, the victim, the fool. Except I wasn't. I've known for 8 days, I said clearly. Sterling's head snapped toward me, confusion replacing rage. What? Cassie came to me 8 days ago, told me everything, played me the recordings. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, toward my husband on his knees with his obscene ring. You made one critical mistake, Sterling. You underestimated both of us. I pulled my phone from my clutch, holding it up so the crowd could see. While you were planning my destruction, I was talking to lawyers. Real lawyers, not the ones on your payroll. Sterling tried to stand, but the security guards pressed him back down. Elena, let me explain. Explain what? How you embezzled $4 million from your company's charity foundation to pay for Madison Whitmore's apartment in Tribeca. How you've been funneling money to offshore accounts your mother set up. How you forge my signature on loan documents that put my personal assets at risk for your failing investments. The color drained from his face. I froze our joint accounts 3 days ago, I continued. I reported your embezzlement to your company's board yesterday. I filed for divorce this morning, citing fraud, emotional abuse, and financial manipulation. And because you so thoughtfully recorded yourself plotting to frame me for adultery, I had grounds to void that prenup entirely. Diane made a strangled sound. I turned to her. Your lawyers are very good, Diane, but mine are better. And unlike you, I actually earned my position. I didn't marry into it. I looked back at Sterling, still kneeling on the marble floor that was supposed to be the site of my humiliation. The board voted you out this afternoon. They're announcing it Monday. Securities fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds, and about 17 other violations that will keep you in court for years. You can't do this, he whispered. I already did. I glanced at the security guards. These gentlemen are federal agents. They've been very patient, waiting for you to finish your proposal before making the arrest. One of them stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. Sterling Vandermeer, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they read him his rights, as they led him past guests who scrambled to get out of the way, Sterling looked back at me one last time. The mask had completely shattered. What I saw underneath was a stranger. I loved you, he said. No, I replied. You loved what I represented. The self-made woman you could parade around while secretly resenting every accomplishment. But you never knew me at all. If you had, you would have known I don't lose. They took him away. Diane followed, her heels clicking frantically on marble, already on her phone with lawyers who couldn't save her. The guests stood in shocked silence. I turned to the orchestra. Please keep playing. The champagne is excellent. Enjoy your evening. The divorce took 6 months. Sterling's lawyers fought hard, but they were fighting gravity. The recordings, the embezzlement evidence, the offshore accounts, it all painted a picture so damning that even his high-priced legal team couldn't spin it. The prenup I'd signed in good faith, believing I was marrying someone honest, was voided completely due to fraud. I walked away with 85% of the marital assets, the estate, the investments, the Manhattan penthouse, and most of the Vandermeer fortune that Diane had fought so hard to protect. Sterling got legal fees and a minimum security prison sentence of 7 years. Diane lost everything: her reputation, her social standing, and most importantly, her control. The last I heard, she'd moved to her sister's house in Connecticut, far from the Manhattan circles that no longer wanted her. Cassie used her testimony and the evidence she'd gathered to negotiate immunity. She also used the platform to advocate for women in coercive situations, speaking about how Sterling had tried to manipulate her vulnerability. We're still friends. Some bonds, tested by fire, come out stronger. As for me, I left Crawford and Associates, started my own firm specializing in representing women in high-stakes divorces, particularly those involving fraud and financial abuse. Turns out, Manhattan is full of women married to men like Sterling. My client list grew faster than I could manage. I sold the estate. Too many ghosts. I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn instead, something human-sized and warm. Something that felt like a home rather than a museum. That's where I met Leon. He was a high school history teacher who lived 3 doors down, with flour on his shirt from baking cookies for his students and a smile that reached his eyes. He'd never heard of the Vandermeer scandal, didn't follow society news or care about my bank account. He liked me because I made him laugh, because I could discuss the fall of Rome over cheap wine, because I didn't pretend to be perfect. Our first date was at a pizza place in Park Slope. Our second was at a bookstore. Our third was him cooking dinner in his tiny apartment while we argued about whether Hamilton was historically accurate. It was ordinary in the most extraordinary way. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, Leon and I were walking through Prospect Park when he stopped at a small clearing where spring flowers were blooming. He didn't have a ring, didn't have a plan, just looked at me with complete sincerity and said, I know it's too soon, but I also know I want to spend every day learning more about you. No timeline, just, eventually, us. I didn't need the ring or the plan or the perfect moment. I just needed someone who saw me and didn't want to change me. Eventually, I agreed. Us. Sometimes I think about that Christmas Eve, about standing in my crimson dress, watching my world implode, about the woman I was, so desperate to prove herself worthy of a life that was killing her slowly. That woman saved herself. Not with a man or money or revenge, though all of those played their parts. She saved herself by finally believing she was worth saving. The mansion is gone. The fortune is mostly donated to organizations that help women escape financial abuse. The designer clothes are packed away. What remains is simpler, smaller, and infinitely more valuable. It's me, the real me, the woman who survived betrayal and came out knowing her own worth. And that's the only crown I need. I keep one photo on my desk now. Not from the mansion or the galas. It's from last week. Leon and me at his school's bake sale, covered in frosting, laughing like idiots. I'm wearing a $30 sweater. No diamonds, no designer labels, no mask. Just me. People ask how I knew to trust Cassie, how I had the strength to fight back. The truth? I almost didn't. I was so busy defending my marriage that I nearly missed what Tiffany saw in 5 minutes. The scariest moment became the most liberating one. The moment I stopped pretending and chose myself. Sterling thought he married someone he could control. Someone so desperate to belong that she'd ignore the obvious. He was wrong. If something feels off in your life right now, if you're making excuses for someone who doesn't cherish you, if you're shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's vision, if you're defending a situation that's slowly destroying you, please hear me. You are not paranoid. You are not asking for too much. You deserve someone who celebrates you, not someone plotting your downfall. And you are strong enough to save yourself. Trust that voice inside you. It's trying to save your life. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.